Well, what's good, everybody? Figured out I'd record a quick update since the last live session that we did on Tuesday. And of course, recapping a couple of things we discussed on Sunday, market outlook as well, before we go live again on ECA tomorrow. So a couple things. First things first, wanted to start with gold. From the very beginning of the week, something that I was anticipating was for gold to ultimately give, a nice pullback before we continue higher. Ultimately, we ended up seeing that, swept some lows, came back to just shy of the 50% of this kind of range on the 4-hour time frame. There's still some liquidity left behind down here, but it's looking like gold is ready to continue higher. There was a really nice opportunity this morning, shortly after the CPI news release. There were relatively equal highs that ended up getting swept from the CPI news release, and then we saw a pretty aggressive sell-off back to this fair value gap overlapping this order block here as well. Unfortunately, I wasn't in a position to call out this trade or even participate in it myself, despite having the markup. But this is a really nice retracement into the fair value gap, into the start of this order block. And so got a really nice clean reaction away from that area. And it's looking like gold is well on its way to take out the high of this daily range and continue to trade higher. If we take a look on the daily time frame, ultimately our eyes are still pretty fixated on these relatively equal highs for gold. So that's still what I'm favoring in terms of the overall directional bias. And I'd maybe be curious to see if we do get, maybe some sort of a pullback on Thursday. And we'll talk about that some more on the live session tomorrow as well for Thursday's live analysis session during New York. But let's see how this fair value gap gets left behind. Maybe we, trade back into that before we ultimately continue higher. But it is quite likely we're going to take out this high going into the Asian session later today, or perhaps even before the New York session ends today, but probably more likely in the Asian session. So that's a quick update for gold. I did want to jump over to Bitcoin, which is something that we've been keeping an eye on over the past little while. Daily time frame perspective. So on Monday, we managed to see a pretty significant liquidity capture. We saw this daily candle wick down, capturing these two lows, which were significant for quite some time, as well as a bunch of previous daily candle lows. And now this has really given us, that sell to buy motion. It's looking like Bitcoin may not actually need to come back to 85K as we were originally anticipating before we continue higher to potentially, at the very least, hunt some buy side liquidity above these highs, take out some seller stop losses, and maybe even potentially go for another new all-time high. Now we are trading inside this daily order block, and there's also a fair value gap that I have marked out from the 4-hour time frame. So there's really two scenarios that I'm looking for here. Either we get some signs of rejection from this fair value gap and get some form of pullback into this buying point of interest, which is something that I'd be looking to take buys off of. Or it is possible that we just continue higher from this zone without getting any sort of a pullback until we get some sort of liquidity capture, like for example, these two relatively equal highs. So kind of the two scenarios I'm looking for on Bitcoin. Either we do in fact fail to get above this daily order block and get some sort of a pullback for buys from this zone, or we just continue higher from here, take some liquidity first before getting any sort of significant pullback. And at that point, we could look to potentially take longs from, for example, this fair value gap, or ideally capture some internal liquidity right beneath these lows and come for this point of interest for buys. So just sitting on my hands right now with Bitcoin, not any sort of position or anything that I'm looking to take. And then I'll end off with the two trades that we are currently positioned in. The first of with the first of which was EURUSD sells, which we shared on Sunday's session. This ended up getting triggered. The sell limit got triggered during the CPI news earlier today as we waked up, traded higher, and filled this fair value gap, and we've gotten rejection since. This is already something that I'm break even on, and I would be looking to just hold to further targets, although I have paid myself. I paid myself as soon as we took out these lows on the smaller time frame. Okay, hourly time frame, we had two swing lows here that were relevant and that I looked to close out some partials at just in the event that this does come back to entry and hit us out break even. But yeah, based on what I'm seeing right now, the two scenarios for euro is we get, some sort of a pullback here into this fair value gap and order block to continue lower. That's scenario number one. Scenario number two would be we do actually come and take out these two relatively equal highs, getting us up and into this alternative point of interest for sells. That's another scenario on Euro USD that I would be keeping my eye out for going into Thursday. So let's see how price prints. I like how in the 4 hour time frame there's this order block that's kind of been left behind and that we have successfully engulfed since this morning's trading. And since this kind of manipulation, right, last two up candles prior to the down move, right, I'd be curious to see how price behaves inside this 4 hour order block to give us conviction as to whether or not we're going to continue selling off or if we're going to trade higher and potentially take out these two relatively equal highs and get out into this potential point of interest. And last but not least, we have the USD CAD buy that I called out earlier this morning. Had a pretty nice initial reaction from the area that we took buys from. USD CAD's price action is kind of looking ugly at this stage in the game. So I am reduced risk on this position, and we're just going to wait to see what unfolds. But ultimately, the zone that we were buying from was this order block on the 4 hour time frame. Right, we had the fair value gap as well as that last down candle prior to the significant previous up move that we were taking buys from. Now, we did get a nice initial reaction, like I said, but this is something that I would be, you know, not really looking to be too favorable for take profit at this stage. Price action can obviously change and become more favorable over time, but looking kind of weak at this stage in the game. So if you haven't already, reduced risk or paid yourself some. I mean, we did see price trade, from entry. We were up at around 40 pip profit mark for a period of time there. Maybe just something to consider if you haven't already paid yourself on USD CAD, maybe look to adjust your risk, take some of your risk off the table, pay yourself. And I mean, what's the worst case scenario here? Worst case scenario is we get hit break even and then we look for another opportunity, right? No reason you should have a full, stop loss on this trade anymore, considering we did get that initial reaction. But let's see what happens. I mean, based on DXY, I think DXY is very favorable for price action right now. USD CAD's just a little bit laggy in comparison to what we're seeing on DXY. DXY, we had a nice 4 hour candle that came and wicked down to fill the daily time frame fair value gap. And although this 4 hour candle that came right after it was kind of weak, let's see what happens. Let's see what happens on DXY. I do like daily time frame perspective here and how we've traded into this fair value gap, filled it, and at the same time capturing some, two previous lows from last Thursday and Friday. So curious to see if we do in fact find support from this zone to trade higher, but let's just be responsive to what the market shows us, right? We don't want to be reactive, we want to be responsive. And what I mean by that is we're just waiting for the market to come to us. We're waiting for more data to gauge, other opportunities, and we're at peace with both Euro USD and USD CAD, regardless of what the outcome is, whether that's take profit, stop loss break even, or whatever the case may be. So, just a quick little update. Wanted to share that before tomorrow's live session. And looking forward to seeing you guys there. We'll be live at 8 a.m. Eastern Standard Time for live New York session analysis. Be there or be square. Much love, fam. See you guys then.